Okay, so this tutorial is going to be to make a radial design. We're going to be using this for a color wheel. And we're going to do it in kind of a fun way. We're going to do it by cutting paper. So the first thing you need for a radial design is a square piece of paper. So to turn this square piece of paper, rectangular, piece of paper into a square, we're going to fold it like so. So I'm just using a plain piece of copy paper, by the way. Computer paper, copy paper. All right, so I'm going to do that again so you know exactly what I'm doing. Basically, I'm going to take this bottom edge, if we're holding it portrait style, and I'm going to bring it up so that it meets the side, and I'll bring it all the way up so that the whole bottom edge is in line with that side. And then I'm going to do this as precisely as I can. So I'm not perfect, but we will try to get this as perfect as we can. So in fact, I can do it even a little better than I did it the first time. So then once I have those meeting up, I'm going to go ahead and make my crease. And even if you did it perfectly the first time, go back and run your finger over that crease a few more times. Run the side of your nail, which is a little bit harder as well, so that you really get a nice crease. And that's the best way to make sure that you get really precise work when you're doing anything with folding paper. Okay, so what we've basically done by doing that is created this shape of a right triangle. So if you will recall from geometry class, a right triangle has a 90-degree angle right there. So when you double that right triangle, that turns into a square. So what we need to do is just cut off that extra piece of paper there, that extra rectangle. So if you want to be really, really nice and precise, you can trace that edge of your rectangle with your pencil. That might help you get a little bit extra precision. And then you're just going to go ahead and cut that off. So voila, we have our square piece of paper without having to really do any math or measuring there. So really useful if you want to do any kind of paper folding like origami or whatever, but you don't have fancy paper. All right, so for the next part of our project, we already have a diagonal line bisecting this in half, which is perfect because that was what we wanted. So now we're going to create another one going the other way. So we'll just fold it in half again. And this is a great way of finding the center of your square. Now, you could also, you may be saying, find that center by folding it in half the other way, which we will. But the diagonal one is a pretty neat trick because you can do that when you're drawing as well. So notice if our folding was precise, then that center, those lines all line up together. So we're doing some of this right now in a particular way because it's going to help us out with some of our lessons later on in the semester. So I'm going to give you just a little bit of a sneak preview of that. So to show you what I mean by that, I'm just going to give you a little example down here. If we had drawn this square, and I'm not measuring it, so let's just eyeball it and hope that I got that to be square. You can find the center by simply doing this. So that's a useful little trick when you can't actually pick up your drawing and fold it in half. You can pretty reliably find the center by using that diagonal trick. All right, so now back to what we were doing. So we're making our radial design, and we're actually going to want this to be a circle instead of a square. Now, a square is a great starting point for creating a circle. So what we are essentially doing is, with our paper folding, we're making a square that looks like this. And to make a circle within this square, I would create these curves between each of these 4 dots. Voila. So it may not be totally perfect, depending on how accurately you can do this, but if you keep working at it a little bit, you're going to get a pretty good circle. So we're going to use that same trick using this. So I've got my folds that are my quote-unquote dots here, and I'm going to connect them. So that very outer edge where the fold is. So here we go, connecting these with a nice curve. So you don't need to know the precise measurement for where this intersects, you just need to create what you think would be part of your circle. If you want to keep going and create your whole circle, you can. I think that's probably going to be enough for me, but if you want to test it and make sure, you could keep going to make sure that it looks like it's going to be accurate. And I'm going to actually do that. So I take you back. Actually do it. Draw your circle. So if you draw the whole thing, you'll be able to see how accurate you were. And notice how I'm necessarily just making one line. I'm sort of doing what I think it is, and then I'm like immediately going back in and kind of like correcting it. So it's this sort of like fuzzy or furry line, whatever you want to think about that as, but kind of all totaled, you'll get it to hopefully a pretty decent circle. All right, so we've drawn the circle, sort of, maybe. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to fold. And I have to actually fold mine back the other way, so we do want to see what we just drew. So you may have to fold yours the opposite way from how you initially folded it. All right, so I can fold it up all the way, and I'm going to cut along this. Now, one thing to notice is that where this intersects this, it should kind of flatten out. If it curves down, if instead of kind of flattening out like that, if I curve down, when I open it up, I would get this shape. This is not what you want. Nope, not what you want. So if that happens, it's not going to be the end of the world, but that's not what we're going for. We're going for a circle. So keep that in mind. All right, so I'm just cutting along my line. All right, so that looks pretty good. I think I'm going to get a good circle. And voila, I've got a pretty good circle. Okay, so now that we have our circle, I'm going to use that to create the template for our color wheel. And I actually had to go back and do this. So that's why I've got some extra folds in mine, so don't worry. So I'm going to line this up, and you can use your ruler, which you have handy, to make sure that you have it pretty well centered. Okay, so I measured and I did my math, and it should be about 1.75 inches each way around. So since I measured that, I'm going to go ahead and trace it. So you want it as close as you can to centered. If it's, slightly off, it won't make a big deal. But you want to make sure you're pretty close. So 1.75 inches at each of these points here, that halfway point. Okay, so now I've got my circle template, and I'm going to set this aside and go back to my folding using paper cutting. All right, now we want to have 12 sections for our color wheel. So we have to make 3 sections in each of these instead of 2. There is a way you can do this folding. It's not necessarily the easiest. Basically what it would be you'd kind of fold this over and eyeball it. And if these 2 look the same, then that's going to be folding it in thirds. So you can do it that way. But some people struggle with that, so we can also use our handy-dandy tool, in case you've been wondering why this has been in the shot. You can also use this. So I would line up my protractor so that the 90 degrees is at that angle there, and then I'm going to mark 30, which would be a third. And so I'm going to mark it right there where that 30 is, and then I'm going to keep going, and where there's a line then that says 150, and I'm going to mark it there too. So we want to make sure that we can connect those dots, and that should give us a straight line. And then we're going to do the same thing at the 60 and the 120. So definitely stand up while you're doing this. I've been standing up the whole time so I can really see what I'm doing. So stand up so you can really see this. All right, and then I should be able to draw a line that goes right through those dots and right to that center. So you might have to wiggle it around a little bit, make sure that you get it just so, because your pencil point takes up room, right? But you should be able to get that. And then same thing over here. All right. And again, my pencil point takes up a little room, so I'm going to do that one more time to get it as precise as I can. All right, and then we're going to have to go ahead and fold it along those lines. So again, the folds themselves are going to take up some physical space, but we're going to try to fold this right along those lines and still get a really nice little point in the center. I'm trying to use those lines, so I'm going to unfold it and then fold it to get as close to right on those lines as I can. So make it as close to perfect as I can. We don't live in a perfect world, but we're going to do our best. All right, so now I can fold, I'm going to fold it back over the other way, and so I'm down to just that skinny sliver, which would be 1/12 of our circle. So if I unfolded it, now you're going to have this extra fold because we had also folded it into eighths, but we want to make sure that when we fold it, we're using those 1/3 and 1/3, and we're not using that one in the center. So we fold it back into thirds. All right. Okay. So before we go on to keep cutting, I needed to come back and use this to trace our template. So I opened up my circle again, and I put it inside the one that I traced earlier. You'll notice mine is actually a little smaller since I had already cut mine, and then I realized, oops, I have to go back and add this to our drawn template here. So I'm going to line this up so that I want it to be so that these straight lines, the center line this way and the center line this way, are pretty much perpendicular to the bottom of the page, so everything lines up to make 90-degree angles. It's not essential, but I'm going to do it that way. So lined that up, centered it, and I'm just going to make little marks here for those halfway lines, and then I'm going to make marks for these lines that are at the 1/3. Now notice I also have these halfway lines here, so I'm skipping those. So remember that within each of these quarters we should have three triangles. So skip this fold here in the middle as you're making these marks. All right, so I'm going around and continuing to mark at those thirds, and again, skipping that halfway fold, skipping these halfway folds. All right, so as I go around, I should have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 marks, and that's going to give me my 12 sections. So before we finish this off, we can connect these. I'm going to need to swap out my ruler here. I'm just taking the oil pastel box from my art kit, or you can get a ruler if your oil pastel box is dirty or messed up or whatever, but that'll work just fine as a straight edge. So I'm just connecting. I'm doing my quarters first. Shouldn't really matter, but I'm going to do the quarters first, and then I'm going to go one past, and that should take me to one past on the opposite side, and those should line up. Okay, and then I can keep going around the clock, if you will. Oops, I skipped one in there. So we weren't completely perfect with centering that, but we did pretty well considering that I was actually using a different template. So now we'll go back to paper cutting. And so now we're going to basically cut kind of a paper snowflake from this.
So how you would do that, you can cut off a shape from the tip if you'd like, and that creates kind of a fun pattern at the center. And then you can cut any shape from here or shapes, any shape or shapes from here, but you can't let them meet in the middle. So we'll keep it kind of simple. So I like when we've got something cool going on around the center. It looks really fun. So I'm going to cut another shape here. Now remember, I can't let it touch this shape, because then you just get one big shape, right? So I made kind of a little curve there. If I want to keep that going, I could do another little curve there. And we do want to make sure that we cut out a whole shape. So if you just cut a line, it just won't look that interesting. All right, so then up here, let's say I'll cut kind of a triangular shape. We won't do anything too complicated, because we're going to then copy this design, and then it could get kind of complicated. So we'll keep it fairly simple. All right, I'm not going to go for the heart, but you could go for the heart if you wanted to. All right, so that'll give us what we've got now. I know I said I wasn't going to cut a line, but if you did want to do something floating in the center, there is kind of an easy way to do that. You could fold it again, but another way to do that is to kind of cut a line, and then from that line, you can cut a little shape. So, and that's what I mean by you can't really see the line once you like put it back together. That line all but disappears. All right, so now we've got our beautiful radial design. Okay, so now I'm just going to lay my radial design on top of my template, and any of these folds, it doesn't really matter which one, will just go right on top of any of the lines that you drew. And you're just going to kind of trace those cuts. So if you don't have everything lining up perfectly, don't worry too much. Having it be just kind of adjust it a little bit, move it a little bit. So basically you want the center of those shapes to fit over those lines. So I'm just going to pause this a little bit, and then we'll come back. Okay, so I paused while I did all the tracing. I definitely did have to kind of shift things around a little bit and make sure I was holding this down. We'll see if I've forgotten places. I think I may have. So let's see how this turned out. By the way, I would recommend kind of drawing lightly so you can erase and fix things. All right, so that didn't turn out too badly. I think the part that's probably hardest is this center part, since those little shifts do make a difference. So you can just go back in And basically you could see how this worked, perhaps, as you were going around and doing your tracing, that across each of these lines you had the same line kind of repeating. So we can go back and adjust this just a little bit to make sure that everything kind of lines up a little bit better. Because, of course, we have not been completely perfect at any step in this process. But we got close enough that we now have this nice design.
So I can tell this is a little bit light on the video. Okay, so I adjusted that and I think the camera is picking up my design a little bit better now. So you don't have to go and make this super, super dark because that doesn't always look the best. But I would just keep it nice and light for now and just touch these up as you will. So if they're not completely perfect, it doesn't ruin the design, but you just want to have it probably a little bit neater and make sure that you complete anything that you forgot to do, that you left undone the first time around. So I think that is basically the end of this part of the video, and the second part of this project will be painting, and we'll also be going over these pencil lines with pen for the final design.